Hello and welcome to today's presentation called Superpower, so how to train for explosive power at any age. So today, main goals of what we're going to look at is the role of power and understanding that its role throughout a lifetime. We're going to look at some simple ways to measure power with the emphasis on simple ways. And then we're also going to look at how to develop power safely and effectively with a range of clients. So before we go any further, I just wanted to address what exactly is power. So many of you may have seen this before. Our force velocity curve. So if you imagine max force in that top left-hand corner, that is our maximum strength. So that is our one repetition maximum. Down the bottom, we've got our maximum velocity. That's the quickest that we're able to move. Generally, that occurs below 30% of our 1RM. Our power sits somewhere in between, so somewhere in the middle. The key thing for general population clients, aging clients, is that although we can assign lifts to these areas and say, bench press, deadlifts, these are max strength, Olympic weightlifting would be strength speed. For most people, it's all relative. So what is 30% and what is that high velocity movement for one? Others, it's not. So some people, we may benefit from loading. Other people, it's just going to be bodyweight movements. So in the example here, we've got just a static jump, and then we've also got a loaded jump. So for one individual, we may need to load it. So why power? So in sport, power is king. In a lot of sports, our court and field-based sports, having an element of power is what differentiates a lot of players and a lot of teams. Cutting, change of direction, jumping, sprinting, throwing are all power-based activities. But it's not just for team sports and court sports. We're also looking at even endurance. So for example, in trail running, we've got an element of uneven surfaces that are corrected, and we're going to improve our ability to handle and withstand that through an element of power. Our tissues become more robust through power training and can deal with more chaotic environments. So even in the endurance world, these are going to be of benefit. So what about the rest of the population? So a lot of times we're looking at these being sports and activities. So the question might be, is it just for athletes? Well, the argument I would put across is that it's probably more beneficial for general population, and especially as we age. There is a lot of emerging research that's linking muscle power to reduce risk of falls and improved functional performance. What we know now is that as we age, things like bone density can reduce. That's osteopenia and osteoporosis if it gets worse. We have sarcopenia, so muscle wastage. But what we're realizing now is that power generally drops off quicker and more drastically. So it is seen as more of a young person's quality to be fast, to be quick. Some examples of how power can have an impact on day-to-day activities. We have things like falls prevention. So correcting a trip or slip is a very fast movement. So losing your footing does require reactions, but it's also a fast muscular action in order to reorientate your body. Emergency situations, so this could be you've stepped out in front of the road and you need to step back from a car, or that mad delivery driver that's just steamed out in front of you. These are quick responses that we need. We don't just need the reactions. Daily tasks, so running to catch a bus requires bursts of muscle power. And even carrying, shopping, even moving furniture and things, all have an element of power. Anyone who has kids or nieces, nephews will know that playing with kids and engaging with children in a lot of activities, there's going to be a power component. So anyone who's had to navigate a ball pit will understand why power might be useful. Otherwise, you may just be stranded there. So in terms of how we measure power, because it is a mix between force and velocity, it can be very complicated. And there are some gold standards out there. So for a lot of the research that I looked into, things like force plates are generally used. There is things that are slightly more applicable and easy to access now through apps. So if anyone hasn't seen already, MyJump, very good app, and for your own understanding can be very useful to download and give a go. It has now been validated as a reliable and valid measure of power. And it's even there's a recent study that looked at MyJump app in elderly population, which is really interesting. I would encourage you to do it for yourself out of your own interest. However, for us, we tend to kind of go towards what is simplest. So if there's an easier measure, then we're always going to look at that, and it's a balance between the time and the cost. Before we go any further into the exact measurements, to help us think about who we're applying this to, what we want to look at is three categories of individuals. So for us in the work that we do, we obviously encounter a wide range, but one of the ranges that we would encounter is this frail population. So these are generally going to be our older adults. For us, these are people in our Thrive classes, our Thrivers. And if we were to define it further, then we use what is called a Rockwood frailty scale. And for the most part, we would see people between a 3 and 6. So these are people that are living with moderate frailty, right up to those that are managing well but aren't necessarily regularly active. For anyone that is 2 or above, generally we can treat them as the next category. If they are below, then they're likely going to be in care, and the recommendations are just going to be general physical activity for these people before we're able to look at power. The middle category is our general population. So these are not necessarily frail, and this is where the bulk, probably 90% of clients and people that we would come into contact and the population would fit into. So if we were to define it, we would say that generally they're able to perform a squat with a load, so whether that's to a bench or wherever is comfortable, we're able to apply some sort of external resistance to that, and can generally perform an elevated press up, so whether that's against a wall or a bar in a rack. So for these individuals, the next step up would be our advanced group. Now, this doesn't mean elite, this just means advanced. These are anybody who's been training strength training, progressive resistance training twice a week for a year. Unfortunately, it is less than 9% of the population, but these would be our advanced category. In order to measure them, what we've done is we can use a very similar test for the general population and advanced clients. And what we can use is just very simply a broad jump. So to get a jump ratio, all we do is take the broad jump distance and then divide that by their height, and that will give us their ratio. So for example, if we've got somebody who's 170 centimeters, they can jump 85, then their jump height ratio would be 0.5. To make that even simpler, what we've said is, if you can jump half your height, that's good. If you can jump your entire height or more, that is great. So really simple, you obviously can measure it. A lot of this you can just even eyeball to get an indication. For the level 3, we can take it a step further, and we can say that there are higher standards, so we can go right up to what would be excellent. And to simplify that even further, what we'd say is that if half and full is good, then we can say elite would be 1.5 or more. So if somebody can jump their height and a half or more, then they're elite. We're unlikely to encounter many people that can do that. That's why we would say good is half your height, great is full height. So for our frail category, obviously slightly trickier because we're not necessarily going to be going straight into impact-driven movements. But there is a very simple, very easy test to do. So we've got our 5 times sit to stand test. So essentially this is, as it sounds, sitting and standing 5 times, and it is just stopwatch how long it takes for somebody to do that. In terms of our norms, these would be taken from the studies on it, the point system. To simplify it even further, I would just say excellent, 12 seconds, good, poor, very poor, and works down from there. There's good enough variability within that to put somebody into a category. You don't have to be incredibly precise with your timing on the stopwatch. You can just time that and it'll give you a good indicator of where they would sit and can be used as an outcome measure. So just to sum up, we've got for our level 1, our frail category, we've got our 5 times sit to stand, and then for our general population or advanced category, we've just got a broad jump based on that individual's height. Now what we're going to do is have a look at some of the practical ways that we can train and develop power. So now in our practical, what we're going to look at is examples of each one of those levels and some safe, effective exercises that we can use as our power base, as our power exercises. So for level 1, we're looking at a low step, power step up. So generally, my advice would be to use roughly half the height that somebody would normally step up to. So however you're measuring that, if that is, for us, we have steppers. If that's 4 steps, we might use 2 steps. And the idea with this is you're trying to stamp into the step and get up as fast as you can. If you need to, you can have assistance, so you can stand next to a wall where you can then rule out some of the stability. The goal is to generate power. It's not necessarily about balance or stability. Our level 2, we've got a sit to broad jump. So the idea is from a seated position, we're having to generate a lot of force and power from a dead start. So we're sitting either a quarter squat or a full squat, and then we are looking to jump as far as we can and stick the landing. Ideally aiming for distance. This is a good one because we can measure how much power we're producing and also give ourselves a target to increase in time. The last one is our loaded jump. So this is for the category that are obviously considerably stronger. They've been training for a decent amount of time, and they've got a lot of power already in the bag. We then need to load it. So very light loading, so between 20 and 40% loading is perfect. You're starting off with a barbell only, doing some barbell jumps or using things like a hex bar. Again, empty first and then maybe putting 5s or 10s on. That'll be plenty. If the movement begins to slow down, you've probably gone too heavy. For all these exercises, generally 5 or less reps is a good marker because then we're trying to emphasize quality over quantity. When it comes to our upper body, 3 examples we've got here is our level 1 would be a seated push press. So seated because this is our frailer category, so they are not having to balance and stand where falls may be an issue. We can do it from a seated position and work on upper body power. We would use a weight that is roughly half of what they would be able to strict press. So for example, if they're able to press 5 kilo dumbbells overhead, we would use 2.5s and try and move them as quick as we can. The second is a rotational ball throw. So that is where we position ourselves side on to the wall, and we're looking to use our torso, use our legs, and use our upper body to rotate and throw the ball to the side against the wall. Again, we can use the rebound as a marker. How far the ball bounces back can be an indication of how hard we've managed to throw it. The last one is our level 3. So this is obviously somebody who's able to do probably at least 20 press-ups. If you're in that camp, then we can do some band-assisted power press-ups. So what that does is makes the movement slightly lighter and easier. The goal with this is band goes round your chest and attaches above you to the rack. And what we're looking to do is explode off the ground and create as much clearance between your hands at the top and the ground. The higher you go, the more power you are producing. If you're not leaving the ground, then we want to try a higher resistance band. If we are popping all the way up to feet, you'd be doing very well, but then you probably don't need a band assistance. So in the next section, we're going to look at the key components of how to train power. So we looked at how to assess power, we looked at why it's important. I've given some examples, but now hopefully I'll give a little bit more insight into how to coach it and also the movements that would be applicable to each level. So to simplify some of the key concepts, the first one would be to move with intent. So because the load is going to be lighter than it would be for, say, a strength activity, what can happen is you become slower as you move it because you know that you can get the repetitions that you're targeting. So the goal is to always move with intent. So in that last example, in the practical with the push press, we have lightened the load by 50%, therefore we need to accommodate that by moving it quicker. Generally, the way that we can do this, if you're coaching it, is using language. So using action verbs like explode, punch, push. So that might be things like push the ground away, punch the ceiling if we're doing our dumbbell press. Also using things like markers. So there's an external cue. So we can use that if we're coaching somebody through a kettlebell swing, we might have our hand up so that we're looking for them to contact your hand to get the height of that swing up to produce more power. It could be that, or it could be on our broad jumps. We're setting targets with cones for people to jump through and past. Also makes it a lot more engaging and a lot more fun. Our second point is quality over quantity. So when the movement slows, stop it. We're not getting any more benefit in terms of power if that movement is slow. So when we train power, we want to be very precise with what we're trying to do, and everything we want is to be fast, clean repetitions, and they're going to be much better than slow repetitions. We want to pick some exercises that encourage velocity. So simple exercises, generally self-correcting, so they're not too technical, things that we can just build speed onto. So we want to learn to jump before we do our loaded jumps and light kettlebell swings before we do heavy kettlebell swings. We want to get the competency first before we start then building the velocity. So to develop power within our level 1, our frailer category, generally it's going to be strength first. So they are going to get more powerful through training strength, and we want to develop good movement patterns before we add power to them, add a velocity component. So for example, we want to be able to squat before we can jump. If we're not there yet, then that is the goal, is to be able to do that. Once we've done that, we want to think of the second tier of power being strength but faster. So just take the same movements that we were doing strength-wise and just try and complete them quicker. So if we're doing a squat, then we're looking at or sit to stand, we're looking at just doing that, but with a faster concentric. That is perfect, good introduction to power. They've been training strength as their base, and now they've moved on to these aspects. And then the top is what we call more of our power-specific exercises. So these are exercises that lend themselves to power. So think of throws, think of slams, these kind of things that are predominantly power-based. We're not necessarily going to do them slow, they're not strength activities. Something that can be really useful in this group is things like ergs. So watt bikes and ski ergs are really good, and doing them from seated as well can take out the balance component. We obviously get the advantage to these is we get adjustable resistance, we get self-correcting exercises. So some of the other exercises that would fit well into this bracket would be things like our sit to stands or quarter squats, so making it slightly easier so we can generate a bit more force. Elevated press ups, so elevating it higher than somebody they could already do, so it becomes a bit easier, and trying to get them to use that fast concentric and power. We've already looked at our low step or power step ups. We've got our ball throws and slams. Again, that doesn't need to be a very heavy weight. So for this category, 3 to 5 kilos is perfect. For some, you might just need to use a ball, whether it's a football, rugby ball, whatever, might be enough resistance initially. And then our dumbbell push press, which we've also discussed, 50% of our normal pressing weight, and just trying to move it quickly. For this demographic, if they do have access to it, machines can also be useful. So pressing, leg press, chest press can be useful options where we're trying to do some sets where they're a little bit lighter than the strength ones, but trying to move them quickly. In terms of our level 2, our general population, for a lot of this demographic, we can just take the same strength movements and there's generally going to be a power variation. So for example, our split squat, we can look at alternating jump lunges. For overhead press, we've got our push press. And if they are more skilled, we can look at push jerk. But these are faster movements of our strength brackets. Some of the other aspects that we look at for level 2 is jump variations. So this is a great time to then introduce jump. We've got that strength base. We're now looking to do some low level jumps. So these can be things like our broad jumps or counter movement jumps. We can give them a target, so whether it's a box or step that we're jumping onto. And varying the stances, so staggered stance jumping can be great options. At this point, generally, we would keep them as singles. Single repetitions just allow for a bit of assessment and allow us to keep the quality high between the repetitions. Ball throws and slams. So for this group, generally 3 to 8 kilos is probably the heaviest that we'd want to go with these. We still want to move it quickly. And we can use slam variations and throw variations, whether that's chest throw, rotational throw, or slams towards the ground. We've got angle bar push press can be a great option as well. So using the angle bar setup to drive from either from kneeling or from standing can be options for our upper body. For our level 3, our intermediate to advanced category, this is where our loaded jumps would come in. So we can use a hex bar or we can use a barbell for our jumping, just to apply a little bit of external load. Also holding 2 dumbbells can work. Generally, that's going to be no more than 60% of our maximum squat. Again, with these, you would start light, start with stick, and then move to barbell, and then begin to load it. Our kettlebell swings, again, these are often used in cardiovascular exercises, but for the purposes of power, generally, a good rule is to not count the build-up swings. So because we want power, we want to just make sure that they're not feeling they have to go straight into it and generate that power straight off the bat. 2 to 3 build-up swings to get the kettlebell moving, and a maximum of 8 repetitions max effort. If you see it deteriorating before then, in terms of the height of the kettlebell, just call it, but that would be the maximum we want to do. So we'd use our height as our power meter on these ones. Other ones can be Olympic lifting variations. A lot of these can be more complex, so if you're new to them, you want to make sure you're learning the technique of them. One of probably the simplest one is what's called a mid-thigh pull. We can load that relatively heavy, relatively early, and it's something that replicates a jump, but we can load it fairly well. They sit higher up on that strength speed, so they are ones that if we want to develop more of that capacity, then we can load them quite early. Generally, they're going to be 30-80%, up to 80% would be your kind of max on these. So in terms of programming, how we put some of this together. Like I mentioned earlier, less is definitely more when it comes to power. So it's a recommendation, 2 to 3 sets of 5 is plenty for most people. And if we're doing, in terms of work to rest, we do want slightly longer recoveries on these. That doesn't mean you have to do nothing, but that might be that you're doing some mobility exercises, something light in between. So that if you were doing, for example, 5 jumps, you could do that every minute on the minute. That would allow for roughly 45-second recovery. Perfect. Generally, when it comes to programming, we want to program little and often. So we want to build it into our strength sessions. Emphasis still being on strength, but all we do is pick 1 to 2 exercises within that workout to target as power. Now, what that could look like is before you do your heavy squats, you might do a couple of sets of lighter jump squats. That helps prime you for the strength moves, takes a bit of power, but then also sets you up well for your strength move. An example of what these might look like in terms of an upper and lower superset for level 1 could be a low power step up and a seated push press, 5 reps of each, a couple of sets of those. For our level 2, we could do a kneeling ball chest pass, so thrown against the wall as a partner, and then pair that with a sit to broad jump. 2 sets of 5 again is plenty. For a more advanced category, we've got barbell loaded jumps, 20 to 40 kilos, and we've got band assisted power press up for sets of 5. This one going slightly longer, going for 3 rounds if they want to develop power further. So, in terms of our key take-homes for training power across a lifetime, our first thing we want to emphasize is to focus on strength first, then build speed. So you want to begin to introduce power by speeding up some of the strength exercises first. The second is we want to coach intent, so we want to make sure that these are not just lighter exercises done at the same pace. We need to make sure that they're done quickly. So we want to use that language in order to do it, use our external targets. The third is our less is more. So we want quality over quantity. 2 to 3 sets of 5 reps is plenty. 1 to 2 exercises per session is perfect for most people.